This thing has been on my dad's desk for almost 2 decades and now it's so dusty that it's gonna make me sneeze. Hey everyone, my name is Envy and today I'm doing a Read Across the US challenge. This challenge originally appeared on Aoife's channel, Pretty Purple Polka Dots. I'll link her down below. The challenge originally had a different name as well. It was called 50 Bookish States Challenge, but my non-native speaker mouth cannot produce those sounds in one go, so I changed the name to Read Across the US Challenge so I can just keep talking. So this challenge is basically like reading around the world but with the US, and the way I understand it is very simple. You look at how many states you've actually visited in real life, and then you're going to see if you've actually visited more states through the medium of books, through the magic of fiction, you name it. So step 1, figuring out how many states I've visited, which is not the easiest thing because I used to spend my childhood summers in California, but we always went on road trips, my parents and I. So I know I went to California, I went to Nevada, and I get a bit lost from there. I probably should have asked my dad. I'm gonna ask my dad. I have asked my dad because he keeps lists of stuff like this, he loves this. So apparently this is my map. I've been to 15 states, which is not bad considering that I was not born and raised in states. I was born and raised in the Netherlands for the most part. So 15 states should be beatable because I have some tricks up my sleeve. Let's get started. California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. That's 11 states with one book. This book. And if I didn't love this book so much, I'd do a mic drop but with a book. I'm not gonna do that because I love this book way too much. This is a Dutch translation of Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Morgan Matson, and it was done very dirty, as you can see. The title now translates back to My Journey with Jake, so Roger is suddenly Jake and I don't know why. Also, the cover made me not want to pick it up when I was about 12. The only reason I picked this book up was that I opened it up and the first thing I saw back then was a map of California, and the place where I spent my childhood summers was on that map, so I was in love. Amy and Roger's Epic Detour is about 17-year-old Amy whose family is moving from California to the East Coast, and she's been asked to drive the family car from Southern California to Connecticut. But Amy doesn't want to drive anymore. So enter Jake, and he's gonna be Jake in this video for me, just to make it easy because he's been Jake for over a decade in my mind. He will drive her there, and at one point in their childhood they used to be friends but they don't really remember each other anymore. So they start their trip and not everything goes as planned. To me, this is the ultimate road trip book because I've visited a lot of the places mentioned in the first half of this book. As you've seen on my map, California, Nevada, Utah. Now at first glance it might seem like your typical YA romance. I mean, it looks like just a YA romance with this Dutch cover, but it's so much more than that. This is a story about family, about loss and grief and coping with grief. It's a beautiful story. I read it at least once every 2 years and I don't think I'll ever get enough of it. It brings me back to those days when I was the one road tripping through the Western US. And it makes me want to go even to Kansas and parts of the East Coast that I know nothing about. I would highly recommend this book to anyone who would like to know what the American road trip experience is like. And also, you're gonna love the music, the playlists, and the illustrations. I know I did. I know I still do. Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska. So my goal is to get as many states covered with as few books as possible, and road trip books are great for that purpose, so I picked Wayward Son. Of course you're not gonna get away without Carry On references in this video. Wayward Son is the sequel to Carry On, so I'm not gonna spoil the plot too much, mainly because my friend just texted me that her copy of Carry On is still somewhere in the mail and she doesn't know when she's gonna get it, so I'm gonna keep it brief with this one. So while Carry On was basically modeled after Harry Potter, I get more of a Percy Jackson feel from this book because there is, of course, an entire journey, and along the way certain things happen, not everything goes according to plan, and at the end we get a big bad guy who has to be beaten. basically Percy Jackson, so I love that. Also, I wanted to cover as many states as possible without having to pick books for every single state, and this gave me a safe way out of Nebraska because I really don't want to talk about Children of the Corn. Oklahoma and Wyoming. My last cheat book is The Way to Rainy Mountain by Anne Scott Momaday. I read this book in my first year of university for a literature class focusing on American literature, and we had to read this book for the week on Native American literature. This book basically has 3 storylines. We have the history of the Kiowa people, their mythology, and then the author's own story. He is part of the tribe, and the 3 storylines get more intertwined the further along you read. So mythology and history come together, and then of course the author has his part to play in the history of his people. I really enjoyed reading this book. It's very thin, as you can see. I think I read it in about 45 minutes. Also, it has beautiful illustrations made by the author's father, so in the art style of their tribe. And even though it's such a small book, I would highly recommend it if you're interested in Native American literature, because it's a great starting point in my personal humble opinion. I'm gonna go back to alphabetical order to have some semblance of order in this video. It's already missing, but let's pretend that things are logically done here. So, Alabama. I read Looking for Alaska last year. I was not impressed. I wanted it to be about actual Alaska and not a girl named Alaska. Yeah, it's about kids at a boarding school doing things kids do at a boarding school. I was not impressed, but at least I can check off Alabama, so that's something. Alaska. And I have a Dutch copy of Son of Neptune. I barely remember this book because, again, it's been almost a decade, but I do remember that there was an ice giant in Alaska, and that image is so stuck in my mind that I can still see it the way I saw it in my mind's eye the day I read this book for the first time. So yeah, I don't remember anything about the entire Heroes of Olympus series, except for an ice giant in Alaska. Arizona. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is correct, but I always read it this way, so I assumed that the host was set in Arizona, and also the way I pictured the whole setting was basically based on Arizona because I'd been there just like 2 years before I read this book. So the host, which is too heavy to hold up the entire time, beautiful Dutch title, is about like an alien invasion, but these aliens have to attach themselves to a host body to stay alive. But sometimes the human mind is too strong, so they stick around, and then there's all this inner turmoil. Main character has one of those issues, and she ends up with a bunch of other humans who have not been taken over, who are not hosts yet. My favorite part about this book is just people living in caves in the desert. I know a lot of people don't like the host, but I like this whole survival element of it. And I only discovered last year that this was supposed to be a trilogy. I'm not too upset about the fact that we only have 1 book because I feel like Stephanie Meyer would have done weird things with this, and I'm pretty happy with where we left it. Indiana. I picked The Dark Prophecy in the Trials of Apollo series, and I had to check the title 5 times because I always just call it Trials of Apollo Book 2. Anyway, I picked this one, even though I could have picked Amy and Roger's Epic Detour as well for Indiana, because this is one of the very few books written by Rick Riordan that take place in like only 1 state. So we get to see a lot of Indianapolis, which was an educational experience, I guess, for someone like me who's never been to Indiana. Louisiana. Vampires on a Boat by the author of Game of Thrones. I really need to stop calling this book Vampires on a Boat, but that's basically what it is. The name of the boat is The Fever Dream, which is why the title is also that, and it's about vampires who are in this ancient feud, and the climax of the book is, if I'm not mistaken, on a plantation near New Orleans. I'm not sure about the location, but it is in Louisiana. Also, they went up the Mississippi and down the Mississippi and up and down and up and down and up and down. I don't remember how far up they went, so I'm just using this one for Louisiana to play it safe. Maine. Basically, I could have chosen almost any book by Stephen King because most of his books take place in Maine. and it's gotten so intense that I've sworn never to go to the state of Maine because if shit goes down, it goes down there. But it is a prime example of it. Also, this was one of the very first books I read in English. I was very ambitious at age 15. So this is my pick for Maine. We're not gonna go into details because I am traumatized. Massachusetts. Also Stephen King. Cell. This is actually one of my favorite books by Stephen King ever. Also one of the first books I read in English. And this is about a sort of zombie apocalypse, but the virus, let's call it that, is spread through cell phone signals. So people get a call one day, they pick up, and something scrambles their brain and they turn violent and they start attacking other people, and this book then follows a few survivors. They start out in Boston and then they flee the city, of course. I don't know where they end up, also because it's not named as such. Not anymore, I think. So we're just gonna say Boston, Massachusetts for this one. And if you're a fan of like a creative take on zombie apocalypses, I'd take this one because the nature of the zombies is, in my opinion, very interesting. Mississippi. This is what The Help looks like in Dutch. I found this book in Peru actually, while I was on a holiday there, and I ran out of books to read. I picked up this one. I was just about 18 years old and this book made a really big impression on me. I also picked it because I'm very interested in the discourse surrounding it, because as I remember it, everyone was super positive about this book, but I think that with the rise of own voices, the whole discourse might have shifted and I've missed out on that. So yeah, I'm going to do some digging and see how people feel about this book nowadays. But to 18-year-old me, this was a very important read. New Jersey. The rules didn't say anything about comics, so I'm picking up Ms. Marvel for this one. Oh, no, stupid dust jacket. Anyway, this is a perfect starting point if you're into Marvel movies and TV series, but you don't know where to start and you feel intimidated by like the decades of backlog that you could work yourself through. But this is perfect if you're new to the whole world, because so is our main character. We basically follow her as she grows into her superpowers. So it's very accessible, it's a very diverse read as well. I'm just in love with this series and I want other people to fall in love with it too, so read this, okay? Yeah, please make me happy. New York. I've read a lot of books set in New York City and I wanted to shake it up a little, pick something outside of New York City. So I looked at my bookshelves and I found this doorstopper. This is actually the entire trilogy in one book, so the Darkest Powers trilogy by Kelly Armstrong. The series takes at least partially place in Buffalo, New York. It's about kids who've been, if I do remember correctly, genetically modified a little bit so they have special powers. There's a girl who is sort of a necromancer, we have a fire demon, we have a witch and a wizard and a werewolf. And this might be one of the very few books in which I prefer the werewolf over the vampire. Although I'm also not sure if there even was a vampire in this book. I loved this when I was 16. I have no idea if I would still love it at 24, so this does not go on my recommended list. It goes on my I used to love it and now I'm afraid to read it again list. Ohio. Next one would have been one of my cheat books if I hadn't covered most of its states with Amy and Roger's Epic Detour and Wayward Son already. And it's this ancient beauty from the 80s. It was originally called Flanagan's Run by Tom McNabb. I have a Dutch copy, as you can see. It's actually my dad's, so I'm gonna have to sneak this back into his bookcase before he notices I've ran with it. This book is actually based on a true story because in the late 1920s, when people were a bit desperate with the whole depression and everything, there was a rich man who said, I'm gonna organize a coast-to-coast foot race. And it was insane. If you've heard the stories about the Olympics in St. Louis, I believe, this is exactly like that. The book is based on the two foot races that took place in 1928 and 1929, but this book is set in 1931. Everyone is fictional, although certain characters can definitely be linked back to the original runners. There is also quite some attention for social issues that played a role in the 1930s. The Hitler Youth is featured, there are female runners, and there is then of course also some commentary on the position of women in society in the 1930s in America. This is just a great book in my opinion, but if you do not like running, you are definitely gonna get bored because there's talk about blisters, there's talk about hating running, there's talk about the importance of shoes. Like, I'm a runner, I love that, but this book is definitely not for everyone. You should only pick it up if you like running or if you're interested in the insanity that took place in sports world about a century ago.
South Dakota.
I have a history book. It's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown. I read this book when I was 16 in high school because my final project for high school was a piece about integration of Native Americans in modern day American society. It was pretty heavy stuff, as you can imagine. So this book is focusing on the years 1860 to 1890, in which a lot of Native Americans were killed in huge battles, one of them taking place at Wounded Knee. It's a difficult book to get through, especially when you're 16 and you just want to fly through fun little books like Percy Jackson. I did not enjoy this read for the reason that the English was way too advanced for me at that point in time, and also it was not the most engaging style of writing that I encountered in this book, but to this day I'm forever grateful to myself for making it through this book because it gave me a whole new perspective on the way Native Americans have been treated throughout the ages in the US. So also not something that I definitely recommend, but a very valuable read. And if you ever do get the chance to read into Native American history, I'd say pick up something like this and learn a bit more about what happened. It is going to be shocking, especially if you're European and you are not as familiar with the whole situation surrounding Native Americans.
Washington State.
I read Twilight. I actually read Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse, and then I stopped halfway through Breaking Dawn because I couldn't handle the pregnancy storyline, and Twilight actually made me hate vampires for a very long time. I just did not enjoy the vampire lore. I also fell asleep while reading New Moon. I was holding it up above my head like that, and suddenly I woke up with a jolt because I dropped the book on my face and it hurt so bad. So yeah, my experiences with Twilight aren't that great. I was one of those pathetic little Twilight haters, and now that I'm older, I can say sure, it's not the greatest fiction ever, but if you like it, go ahead and like it. I read it in one day, the first book, so I do see the entertainment value of it. It's just not my thing. So that is a grand total of 29 states, and 29 is more than 15. I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back for finding out that 29 is bigger than 15, because this morning I failed a statistics exam and I feel like I can't even say what 1 and 1 is. So yeah, well done me. 29 is more than 15. But seriously though, I actually feel like I learned a lot about myself while doing this challenge, because I was just picking the first book that came to mind whenever I saw a certain state on a map, and I think it says a lot about who I am and what I'm interested in. So road trips, vampires, vampires on road trips or boats, and then there's Native American culture. I think that is an interesting mix, and I hope you enjoyed seeing me go through those books. I'm very interested in which state you've visited through the power of books. So if you're interested in doing the challenge, tag Aoife. She was the one who came up with this, and I just, like I said, changed the name because I fail at pronouncing the original name. I'm so sorry, Aoife, but I can't get it out of my mouth. So yeah, you know what you gotta do if you enjoyed this video. Give it a like, comment, do the subscribe thing, and I hope I will see you all in the next video.